Hello everyone and welcome to this webcast introducing Xuni and Xamarin.Forms. I'm your host today. My name is Greg Lutz and I'm the product manager at Component One for Xuni. I'm joined here by my fellow teammates Kelly Ricker and Ross Dieterer. In today's webcast we're going to cover Xuni. This is our new native cross-platform UI control set designed for Xamarin.Forms. But we can't fully dive into Xuni without first talking about Xamarin.Forms itself. Xamarin.Forms is a great platform that unlocks a lot of potential for mobile app developers and .NET Visual Studio developers. This helps these developers reach a new mobile user base. So before even getting into Xamarin.Forms, I'm going to start this discussion with a brief look at the current state of mobile development as a whole. And then I'm going to pass it to Kelly, who will walk you through hands-on building a mobile app with Xamarin.Forms. He's going to use Visual Studio and, of course, a lot of C# and XAML to write a very basic app in Xamarin.Forms. The hands-on exercise is beginner level, perfect for those of you who may have some experience with C# or .NET, but looking to get into mobile development, either for your business or just as a hobby. After Kelly walks you through building a cross-platform mobile app with Xamarin.Forms, I'm then going to pass it to Ross, who will show you how to add some Xuni data visualization controls to enhance the same app in all platforms at once. At some point during this webcast, and then again at the end, we'll stop and answer some of your questions. At any point, if you have a question, type it into the question box on your screen. If we can't answer all the questions live, then we will certainly follow up with you by email after the webcast. So let's begin. First, we're going to talk about a brief background on the current state of mobile development. Consumers are driving software development into the mobile space. It's a trend that you've all probably noticed or read about from market researchers. Businesses as well that used to rely on PC and desktop browser-based solutions are now adopting more and more mobile solutions. Bring your own device is a buzzword you may have heard of. That means that companies are allowing their employees to use their personal phone for business. This means that enterprise apps are being developed in a way so that users on any device can access them. For mobile app development, we have two choices, each with their own pros and cons. Developers can either build a mobile web app or build a native app. With mobile web apps, there are some tools that help you make a web app that looks and feels like a native app. Basically, you get a mobile website that runs in its own Chromeless browser, and it's styled to match the native UI conventions. These are called hybrid apps. They're built like mobile websites, but they appear in app stores. And some common tools out there to build these include PhoneGap and Ionic. Mobile websites or mobile apps are primarily written with HTML and JavaScript, plus any server-side technology you may use like ASP.NET or PHP. With the bring your own device movement, companies are preferring to support as many mobile device platforms as possible. So unless your job involves a high level of security, you'll be free to bring any phone you wish. Web apps in theory reach 100% of users because all mobile devices these days have the ability to load a web page. HTML5 is a viable cross-platform solution. With native apps, to build a native mobile app means you're going to use specific tools and programming languages for each device you wish to target. For Android, this is Java, and a popular programming tool is Eclipse. For iOS, the language is Objective-C, and you would use Apple's Xcode to produce and publish apps. For Windows Phone, you would use C# and Visual Studio. These are the three biggest players in the mobile space. And as I said, this is completely driven by users. They're the top three in pretty much every country as of the past year or so. So they're the only three platforms we really need to reach most users. With native mobile apps, if we only look at these three platforms, we're probably targeting near 100%. I say about 99%. Because there's still a few other platforms, including BlackBerry, out there that some users are using. So if you took out Windows Phone, you're probably then looking at about 95% reach. Personally, I use and I love Windows Phone, so you would be excluding me. Android and iOS are definitely the top two with varying differences in all smartphone-heavy countries. So most companies who produce mobile apps will be producing apps for at least Android and iOS. But let's look at some of the pros and cons of web versus native. Well, at this point you might be thinking that a mobile web app wins hands down. But there's one critical thing that you can't do with a web app, and that is create a truly native experience. Maybe someday, but currently the web apps have a browser-like behaviors that hold it back from feeling completely native. So in addition to some performance and security concerns, web apps are styled by CSS. So you also have to provide multiple styles for your app to make it appear native for each operating system. Native apps are generally preferred by users because they integrate more intimately with the device. They have direct access to hardware, and they can even match the style of the system by default. Most importantly, native apps offer the best performance and are preferred because they offer just better overall experiences. If you use a smartphone, then you probably agree. My personal worst experience was with the Words with Friends app. For the longest time, the creators of that app only provided a web app for Windows Phone users. Everything from the button behavior to the pop-ups, they just never felt like true Windows Phone. So the performance issues, while they may have been service-related, I wasn't happy with the app until they finally provided a true native experience. So basically, if I had to summarize the debate between native and web apps, native apps deliver the best overall experience, but there's a greater development challenge. You have to write 3 times, essentially. Web apps solve this development issue. You only need to write once in JavaScript, but the quality is not ideal, not truly native. Since users prefer native apps, and as I said, users or consumers are driving our development choices, a lot of businesses and developers are going to go the native route, taking on the extra workload, because in the end, it's worth it to them. But what if we could have the best of both worlds? That is, write once, but also get native apps. That's where Xamarin enters into the picture. Xamarin first wrote a platform on top of Android and a platform on top of iOS, and these produce native apps by writing C#. These platforms are known as Xamarin.iOS and Xamarin.Android. This past year, they then combined those platforms, added in Windows Phone, because Windows Phone already supported C#, and they built a single cross-platform on top called Xamarin.Forms. With Xamarin.Forms, you write C# in one shared portable library, and you get 3 apps, one for iOS, one for Android, and one for Windows Phone, all with the exact same experience. The C# in XAML is transformed by Xamarin.Forms into the native equivalents on each platform. What Xamarin did was they identified similar UI conventions in each OS, and they basically connected the dots. For a great visual example of this, here we have the Xamarin tabbed page layout. Now this works across all platforms. In iOS, we see these tabs along the bottom, as the user might expect. It's hard to see in the screenshot because there aren't icons, but there are tabs along the bottom. For Android, they see them across the top, and Windows Phone sees them across the top as well using the underlying pivot control. If you're a Windows Phone developer, then you've definitely heard of the pivot. My background is in Windows Phone and Silverlight, so I can speak that language. I don't know what iOS and Android developers call their native equivalents to the pivot, and with Xamarin.Forms, the good news is I don't ever need to know. So unlike a mobile web app where the UI is identical on each OS, with Xamarin.Forms we get an experience that's tailored for each operating system. The Xamarin.Forms has a base toolset that provides a great collection of controls to get you started. In Xamarin speak, they're called views, which I believe is derived from the Android tongue. This includes labels, editors, buttons, date pickers, and the cornerstone of all apps, the list view. You can do a lot by just using the basic controls. But for any specialized control, you have to write them from scratch. Xamarin.Forms they do have an extensibility point where you can provide custom renderers. Essentially, you can write your own native controls and write a Xamarin wrapper, so to speak, that works on top of it so that you can incorporate your controls and your custom business objects into your apps. But this is a lot of work. So there are many libraries out there that extend the Xamarin platforms to provide more controls for you. Xamarin has even put together a component store that you can browse and get more controls, some for free, some are paid. And that finally brings me to Xuni. Xuni is our collection of native cross-platform controls designed for Xamarin.Forms. What we've done with Xuni is we've written some controls on the native level and then wrote the Xamarin binding and rendering layers so that they work inside Xamarin.Forms. This is what Grape City and Component One are best known for, is creating components. What makes Xuni unique is that we've architected the native controls in a way so that we can maximize the code, reuse, and shareability across each platform. And what I mean by that is that every feature and property is in there in the native code and therefore supported in Xamarin.Forms. we don't have to sacrifice any native functionality on the Xamarin.Forms level. By developing native controls first, we're now also in a position to not only support the Xamarin.Forms platform, but we're also going to be able to expand our reach, providing controls for native developers as well. So the first release of Xuni is focused on data visualization. This includes Cartesian charts with 9 chart types, including bar, column, line and symbols, area, scatter, candle, high-low open close, and bubble. There's radial pie charts, donut charts, and gauges, as well as linear gauges like bullet graphs. Some of the things we focused on to make Xuni worthwhile as a small first offering are things you really need in mobile data visualization controls. Touch and interaction is a given. For the charts, the end user can select any point, they can rotate the pie charts, even adjust the gauge values like a slider. With device-specific styles, this is mostly seen in the tooltips, which are modeled after each device guidelines, and they're also inspired by just popular interfaces we found on each OS. So while the API is identical, we can deliver a slightly different appearance out of the box on each device. Animation is another key feature in all of the controls. We feel the best mobile apps utilize animation in some way, and we've made animation a built-in feature that is enabled by default, so it really helps you get up and running very quickly. Of course, any data visualization control needs a rich data binding architecture, so you can populate the controls the old-fashioned way in code behind or through MVVM-style XAML bindings. And with a customizable object model, you can alter the appearance in countless ways and combinations. All of these controls are based off of our Widgmo 5 controls for responsive web development. And as with all of our products, Xuni's control collection will continue to grow based upon feedback from you especially. And I'm going to touch more on that at the end of this webcast. So I'm first going to take a break right now and see if we have any good questions in here. So let me pop this open. Oh, here's a good question. So someone just submitted, in 20 words or less, how is Xuni different from Xamarin? Well, Xamarin is essentially the platform. If you're familiar with Component 1, we've always provided components on top of the platform, for instance, on top of Microsoft's .NET platform, the WinForms platform, WPF, ASP.NET. We're providing the components on top. Xamarin, in this case, has provided the platform. Xamarin.Forms is the platform, and we're providing the components on top. Now, of course, Xamarin provides controls already, but they're providing the basic controls, the basic building blocks. Component 1 in Xuni, we're expanding that control set. And I know that's more than 20 words, but another good question is, what if we're using Xamarin already? We're using Xamarin.iOS or Xamarin.Android. Can we use Xuni with that? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We've written this first version of Xuni specifically to work with Xamarin.Forms. We were really excited about Xamarin.Forms when it came out this year. That's what we focus on right now. As we lead into V2, we are exploring more. We're going to be opening up to more developers, including native Android developers, native iOS, and we're even going to be looking at the Xamarin.iOS and Xamarin.Android platforms individually as well. So next I'm going to pass the mic off to Kelly, and he's going to give you a hands-on tour of Xamarin.Forms. He's going to build a simple cross-platform app using the standard toolset from Xamarin. And then after that, Ross is going to jump in and add some Xuni controls to the same application. Now keep in mind, we're not Xamarin employees, so we may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we'll try.
So hello all, my name is Kelly Ricker. Thanks Greg for going through that first section for us. I'm going to do a little introductory to Xamarin.Forms here. So Xamarin.Forms, the development for that specific platform has a few requirements. For iOS deployment and testing, you need to have a Mac. For Windows Phone deployment and testing, you need to have Windows 8 or newer. And for Android deployment, well, you can do that on either of those. In terms of the programming IDE, Xamarin has its own IDE called Xamarin Studio. Now, if you're developing on a Mac, that's what you'll be using exclusively. On Windows, you actually have the choice between Xamarin Studio or Visual Studio 2013. Also worth noting, if you're using Visual Studio, you can do testing, emulating of the Android platform as well as the Windows Phone platform. But once again, you still need to have a Mac nearby so you can actually test your iOS projects. In terms of actually getting Xamarin.Forms, let me show you their website really quickly here. So if you actually just go to Xamarin.com, you can pretty easily get a download for this. As far as products here, you can go to Xamarin Platform, or if we just scroll a very short ways here, you'll see right here for build, here's a download link. So that's really all you need to do to get Xamarin. So with that, let me go ahead here and let's open up Visual Studio. And we're going to create a new project. So while we're waiting for this, once this opens up, once you install Xamarin, it actually gives you a bunch of different project templates. You can use those to basically get started here. In fact, I'll be doing just that in a moment. There are a couple of different project types. I'll point them out here. So we're going to go up to File. We're going to do New and New Project. So you'll see here under the list of templates on the left-hand side, there's actually a Mobile Apps tab. And within that, we actually see that there's the possibility of either a Xamarin.Forms portable project or a shared project. And over here on the right, it'll actually specify the differences between them. Now, they're mostly structural. There is one technical difference as well. So for portable, you see that you can use Visual Studio 2010 and higher. The actual shared project requires Visual Studio 2013 or newer. So let me go ahead and name this. I'm just going to call this Webcast. Go ahead and create the project. Now this will take a few seconds here. As it's creating this solution, actually, you'll see inside the project, well, rather inside the solution, that there's actually going to be multiple projects. There's going to be some shared code, essentially, that's going to constitute one project. That's mostly what we're going to be working in. But there will be 3 other projects on top of that. Now, the 3 other projects, cancel this, they basically relate to platform-specific code. So sometimes you're going to end up needing to do some kind of specific configuration based on what platform you're going to. And you would do that within the respective project. So just to be a little bit more visual about this, you'll see on the right-hand side here, here's the Webcast Portable project, here's the Webcast Droid project, Webcast iOS, and down at the bottom, Webcast WinPhone. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some code into the shared project here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new class, and this class is basically going to act as the data source for our project. I am, in fact, just going to call this class data source. And I'll go ahead and click Add. Now, I already went ahead and created some code which I'm going to use in this data source class. Let me drag and drop that. And I'll just step through this just to give some idea of what specifically is going on here. So essentially what we have is we have a data source that has some simulated data in here. We have several different quarters. And this is meant to represent the year 2014. On top of this, we have within those quarters data about sales, downloads, and expenses. So the data source class, it basically has a data property, and inside that property, it's going to be constituted of these quarter objects, which if we take a look down here, we'll see this has the properties of name, sales, downloads, and expenses. So this data source is essentially going to be our view model. So let me go ahead and let's actually add something to actually visualize the data. So I'm going to go ahead and add another new item. And I am going to add a form sample page. And I'm going to call this first page. Let's just go ahead and click Add. Now, if you're already a Microsoft developer and you're working with WPF or perhaps WinRT, you're familiar with Microsoft's version of XAML. So if you're not from a background of working with XAML at all, XAML is a declarative markup language that defines our user interface. So in a sense, it's similar to the manner in which HTML is the language behind the visual presentation of a web page. So once again, I'm going to add some code here. Let me select this and remove this code. I'm going to drag and drop some more code from my toolbox. We'll go through this. So what we're looking at here, this is going to be a content page. Inside this, you'll see right up at the top it says stack layout. Now there are various different types of layout in Xamarin.Forms. Stack layout basically just arranges everything in a line, depending on how we want to orient things. So this is basically just going to stack several list views on top of one another onto a page. With regards to layouts, though, there are other layouts that are available to you. There's absolute and relative layouts, which should be familiar if you're from, say, a web development background, or you could do some kind of grid layout if you were to divide up your page into a grid and arrange things within that. That's completely possible as well. So to step through this, inside each stack, I'm going to have a label up top. This is basically going to function as my title. So this is going to be Sales 2014 here. Underneath, I have a name for my list view. This is going to be the first one. And then basically within that list view, I'm stacking another label that's going to be binded to the data that's coming back from the sales property. So let me go down to the next list view. Once again, I have another label up here. This is going to function once again as a title, Downloads 2014. Creating my list view and naming it right below. And then once again inside, I'm going to be binding to another property, downloads in this case. And then finally, something very similar here with the label for expenses. The named list view, expenses list view, and then the binded label here. So there's one other thing that I'm actually going to have to do to get my data. So let me go into the code behind for the first XAML. I'm actually going to need to set up the item source. Now that's something I could do in the XAML. I'm going to do it in the code behind here though. So let me remove this and I'll bring over some code I already wrote. So you'll notice at the moment at least there's some errors here. This is just because I haven't saved the names that I created on my XAML page for the individual list views. This will be solved as soon as I actually build the project. But basically what I'm doing, I'm creating a new source object, and then I'm setting the item sources for each individual list view. And I'm just going to set it to the data property for my data source. So now that I've done that, there's one other thing that I have to take a look at here, and that's actually telling the application to display that page when it loads. So right now you'll see here in the app constructor, it's saying the main page to a content page. The content's in a stack layout, and then basically it's just going to put this label in here, welcome to Xamarin.Forms. Rather than point to this content, I would prefer that it actually points to my first page. So I'm going to actually remove all of this. I'm just going to add in here, first page. So now when the application loads, the main page should be my first page. So with that, I should be able to run this. Let me set the Windows Phone as a startup project so that we can see it here. Okay, And this is very plain at this point, but here's the content that we basically bind it from our data source, arranged how we specified in our XAML. 3 list views, one basically for sales, one for downloads, and one for expenses. So at this point, I'm actually going to pass the conversation over to my colleague, Ross Dieterer, who's going to show how you can actually make this look a little bit more visually interesting using Xuni.
Thank you for that demo, Kelly. Hello, everyone. My name is Ross. I work here on the customer engagement team at Component One. I'm going to go ahead and take the sample that Kelly was working on, and we see here we have, like, in my mind, I'm seeing 3 series all with some data. So I think that maybe a bar chart or a column chart might be a good visual representation here of this data set. To begin, if we want to add Xuni to this application, we first actually have to go get Xuni. You can go to our website, www.component1.com. At the top, you'll see our products list, and here's some of those products that Greg was talking about earlier in the presentation. We do have a bunch of platforms that we have controls built on top of them. And over here on the right, under mobile, we have our Xuni products, so you can go ahead and click on that. And this will take you to the product page. You can find a lot of great information on here. But I wanted to point out over to the right here, this big blue button is the download free trial. You can download that trial, install it. It'll give you 30 days to play around with Xuni. I'll talk a little bit more about the trial here in a minute. So once you download Xuni and install it on your machine, you can go ahead and open up Visual Studio. And basically what that install did was install some samples onto your hard drive, as well as configure your NuGet package manager to be able to actually find the Xuni project or NuGet packages in the manager. So we can actually find those if we write in our Solution Explorer on the right. If we right-click on a solution and go to Manage NuGet Packages for Solution, or at the top, we can go to Project and then Manage NuGet Packages here. But I'm going to right-click here, go to Manage NuGet Packages for the solution itself. And it'll default here when it opens up the manager to packages, but you just want to make sure that you click on the Online tab here. On the left here, you should see Grape City. If you don't see Grape City, chances are that we didn't actually install it correctly. But once it's installed, you should see the Grape City tab here on the left under Online. And then in the middle here, it'll go out and actually find all the available Xuni NuGet packages that we have. So we see 5 here at the moment. Greg had mentioned that we have the Flex Chart, the Flex Pi, and the Gauge controls. Chart core and core are dependencies or requirements. But as it turns out, we don't actually need to manually install each one of the dependencies. We can just click on our Flex Chart control and go ahead and install that. And what that's going to do is it knows that it needs to get chart core and core as well. But first, it's going to ask us where we want to install the packages. And in this case, we actually want to add the NuGet packages to all 4 of our projects in our solution. So we'll go ahead and make sure all 4 of those are checked. Click OK here. And it's going to go out there and it's going to download the Flex Chart NuGet packages as well as Xuni Core and Chart Core. And then it's going to ask you to accept the end user license agreement, which we will. And while this is downloading, I just wanted to note that on the Component One website in our blogs, Kelly and I have put some 101 guides up there for each one of our controls, very similar to what we're doing here. So if you're interested in seeing the Flex Pi or the Gauge, definitely go to our blogs and check those out. We do have samples up there you can download as well. So I'd highly encourage that. Should be finishing up here in just a second. So we'll go ahead and close this now that we've added all three of those. So now that we have Xuni actually in our application, just like Kelly did with his first page, we need to actually add a view here that we can go ahead and add the chart control to it. So I'm going to add a new element to the Webcast project here, and it's going to be a Xamarin.Forms page. But rather than calling it first page, I'm going to call it first chart page. And we'll go ahead and add that. And you can see here over in the right-hand side we have our first chart page.xaml, and if we expand that we'll see our code behind file there as well. So now that we're in the code behind, we actually need to, just like we have using Xamarin.Forms right here, we need to include the Xuni references. So those would be Xuni.Xamarin, and then in this case we're actually going to be using the flex chart. So I'm going to go ahead and include that here in our code behind. And then I also have some pre-made code here just to save some time. So let me get this opened up. So just like Kelly was saying, we could initialize our item source for our flex chart in the XAML. I'm going to show it here in the code behind. So we have that same data source that we worked with before. We just instantiated here. We'll call it DS. And then we have this chart. And right now there's an error because it doesn't know what chart is. And we'll go ahead and add the chart in the XAML in a second here. But we're defining that item source as our data source.data, the same way that we did it for the list view. So we're done here in the code behind. I'm going to go back to our actual XAML and copy our content page in here. And I'm just going to replace what's already there. The only thing that really changes is just we're adding the Xuni reference, just like we did in our code behind. We actually have to add the reference to our XAML as well. So just to repeat that if there's any audio issues there, basically the only difference that I did here was we just added the Xuni namespace. Just like we did in the code behind, we had to use the using statement to bring in the control. We're doing the same thing here, just a different syntax. So now that our XAML actually knows what a flex chart is, we can go ahead and add the chart control to our stack layout. And we're using stack layout here just because it's the easiest. So we're defining our stack layout here, and inside that we're actually declaring a new Xuni flex chart. And then we're giving it that unique name of chart. Once we actually compile this and run it, the code behind it will actually be able to identify this variable here, very similar to what the list view was. So we're not going to worry about that. Then, of course, we need to bind our X value to something. Then we can set the item source, and then the chart type, I want to be a column chart. Then inside our chart control, we have properties like series. So I'm going to define a new series here, and there's going to be 3 chart series. One is going to be the sales, one is going to be downloads, and the other is going to be expenses. And then we give it a name here, and this name is actually what's going to be showing up in the legend when we run the chart. And then we're setting the color of each series as well. So you can pick a color palette that you enjoy. So we basically have our data source, our data is coming over, we have our code behind binding the item source to our chart control, and then we actually define some properties of the chart. There's 2 things we need to do to get it to run now. Just like Kelly did with his item source sample in the app.cs project, we actually want our main page to now not be the first page, but we actually want to load the first chart page now. So we'll go ahead and do that. You can see there it found the using IntelliSense. And then for the Windows Phone, we actually, in our main page.xaml, we need to add some initialization in there in the code behind. Now, if I compile this as is, it'll run. It just won't display anything in the Windows Phone emulator. I just need to add this code block here. Xuni.xamarin.py .flexchart.platform .winphone.image. FlexChart renderer, sorry. .init. Go ahead and then close that there. We have our WinPhone set to our startup project. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Great. So you can see here when that chart loaded, I know it's kind of hard to tell with GoToMeeting, but there was some animation there. Greg did note that in the slides earlier that it is kind of a built-in behavior there. I mean, you can make changes to that, but that is something that's kind of built in just for that more native experience. The thing that's probably sticking out right now is the nag screen right here. It's saying that we don't have a license key. Well, that's as expected because we actually haven't added one yet. We can go ahead and add one. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to remove that nag screen. And we're going to go ahead and stop running this application. Just give it a minute there. I think it... Okay. So in order to get a license for Xuni, let's say we're doing some evaluation. We want to go back to our website, component1.com, and the Xuni product page. And then we want to go to resources here. And this is all documented online, so you don't have to write a list down right now. But we do have a licensing tab here. And then since we're not sure if we want to buy Xuni yet, we just want to evaluate it for our 30 days. So we're going to click the Generate an Evaluation key. Now, if you're not logged in, it's going to ask you to log in or create an account. But basically what you need to do is the next page, you just select Evaluation, and then you want to give it the name of your solution. So you would just say, give me an evaluation key. The name of my solution is Webcast. And then there's going to be a text box, and it's just going to basically generate this right here. And I'll copy this out of Notepad because it's kind of hard to see. And we'll go ahead and put it in Visual Studio. The way where we have to put this is we actually have to add a new class. Just like we did for data source, we're just going to call this class license. So we have a class here called license, and then I'm just going to copy and paste that same string that the website gave me right in here. So it's just a string with a key value. It's fairly long. So once we have our key in here, we actually have to go back to our app.cs. And in our onStart method, since Xuni is a runtime licensed product, we actually have to add it in the onStart method. And this is fairly straightforward. All we have to do is do Xuni.Xamarin.Core.License Manager, and this is all IntelliSense helping us out here. It's all documented on the web as well. And then since I call my class license, I'll do license.key. So let's go ahead and run this again, and this time we should see without that nag screen there. Great. So this is what it looks like on the Windows Phone. I don't have a Mac with me, but I did grab a screenshot of what the same sample looks like rendered in an iOS. So this is basically what it looks like if you were to render it in iOS. So you can see here, we see some elements on the chart. We have obviously our 3 series here. I picked a nice lighter blue color palette here. There's a couple things I wanted to point out. If you click or tap. So like if you're using the emulator, you want to click on the bar because we don't have a touch screen. But if you're actually on a device, all you would need to do is just tap on the bar. And what it will just display these tooltips here for us. We can customize these. Very helpful. You can see here as well we have our legend. These are obviously customizable. I don't necessarily like them side by side, especially for a landscape, portrait view here. So let's go ahead and stop running this, and let's move that legend to the top. That way it's kind of off. That way we have the bar chart fills the entire viewport for us. So in our first chart page, .xaml, the same place that we defined our stack layout, we actually define the chart and the series. We can customize the legend here as well. So I define my flex chart series, I give it some chart series, then we close that tag. And right before we end the control tag, we want to actually add the properties for the legend. So we have our flexchart.legend, and we have chart core chart legend. You can see here we set some colors, some borders, and some font sizes. But the main thing we want to look at here is the positioning. So now I want to say I'm going to put it on top. You can see here that we're not actually seeing the chart core. That's okay. We actually haven't added it to our references up here in XAML. So we can go ahead and do that now. So let me go ahead and add this. And then if you note here, I'll zoom in a little bit. If you note here now that the red line went away because it was actually able to find the chart core. So we can go ahead and run this now. And we should see the legend on top of the bar chart. Great. You can see here we still have our tooltips. And it's up the top there. It's important to note, the first time I did this, I tried putting the legend above the series. I thought that, if you just change the order of these things, maybe that would put the legend at the top. Now, that's not actually the case. It's just this position tag, so that's something to keep in mind as well. And just to reiterate, we said that you can either use XAML or the code behind to configure the controls. In the beginning, Greg said that we were going to be focusing on implementing it mostly in the XAML. But I did write the C# code for you guys to take a look at. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. Rather than loading the XAML page itself, we can actually define the chart control here. We can see we have a static function that returns a chart. And that chart is actually our flex chart object with the get control call here. You can see we just instantiate a new flex chart. We call chart, same thing that we did in the XAML. We set the chart type to, in this case, a bar or column. We actually did, this is the same code we used to set the data source. Same way we set the X binding. We created a new series list. We defined, which chart that the series is going to go into. What they're actually going to be displayed in the legend, and which item from our view model we're actually going to be bound to. And then we add those series, define some colors for each one, maybe do a little bit of adjustments on the axis. So if you're not comfortable with XAML, and if this looks more comfortable to you, you absolutely can do it this way. I just chose to do it mostly in the XAML today. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Greg.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ross and Kelly, for giving us that demonstration. All right, so before we wrap up this webcast, I'm going to open up the question panel again. Let's see if we have any good questions to answer. So we have some questions on the chart. One question is, do you support multiple y-axes on the charts? And the answer is no, not in the first version of FlexChart, but that is a feature we will definitely be adding for V2, which is in July. Another question is, could we code in C# rather than XAML? Yes, as Ross pointed out, everything you can do in C# you can also do in XAML. The XAML functionality is a bit newer for Xamarin.Forms, so we were showing that off. But if you were used to using Xamarin.Forms in the past, then you probably wrote all of your apps in C# only. Another question, is view model binding supported? Yes, so as I mentioned, we definitely support MVVM, data binding, all of the controls. The data source class that Kelly created is essentially a view model, as it exposes public properties that you can bind to in XAML. And you can set the item source, you can bind to it in XAML, or you can set it in code behind. Let's see. So we have a question on the licensing. So the licensing is actually validated at runtime, and it requires no network connection or service calls. Essentially, our code validates the license key that's passed into the application and checks whether it's good or bad. Another thing is, if you're a current customer of Component 1 Ultimate, then you are eligible to generate Xuni keys, as Xuni is part of the Ultimate package. All right, I think that's all the questions I'm going to answer right now. If I didn't answer your question, if we didn't type it in or we didn't answer it over the air, then we'll follow up with you by email after the webcast. So 2015 is going to be a big year for Xuni. This is the first year as we continue to grow and expand the product. The next major release will be in July, and it's going to include our Flex Grid control, which is a data grid. And we're also going to have some specialized editors that will go along with that. We also have plans to include document and report viewers in either V2, but definitely V3 at the latest. And that's going to be V3 is in November. After this webcast, we're actually going to be sending everyone a survey, and one of the questions is which controls you're most interested in. And there are others on the list too, like autocomplete, rich text box, PDF viewer, and we really appreciate the feedback that you guys provide us, because it'll help us shape, the future of this product, and it might even, shake up the features that we're planning for V2 and V3, depending upon the amount of feedback that we get. And of course, you can go to www.gozuni.com, and that'll take you to component1.com/Xuni, where you can find all the product information, all the licensing information. You can download it. You can even find links to our apps in the app stores, so you can actually try it out on your phone. Feel free to contact myself and my team by emailing me. My email's on the screen. What I would love to hear from you are your feature requests and your control requests. You can expect the survey that I mentioned early next week. And as a bonus, if you submit answers to the survey, you'll be entered to win a free Xuni license in your subscription. And that your subscription would include all of the controls that we have planned for 2015. And be sure to follow us on Twitter @GoXuni. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webcast, and have a nice day.